with the lymphatic system. Essentially, what we found through the research around this is that you're seeing a number of different things improving out of this. One is the clearance rates for different waste materials from the brain, and that's really measured. Those are typically blood draws. And what's been assumed around this, although we in some cases what we have is like the ABC, so kind of the dosing and how it's being used and how it's triggering the XYZ of outcomes. We don't have in some cases the mechanistic underpinning for this completely delineated yet, but the increase in clearance of different kind of waste proteins in the brain has been measured relatively effectively in large-scale studies.
Welcome to the Health Fix podcast, where health junkies get their weekly fix of tips, tools, and techniques to have limitless energy, sharp minds, and fit physiques for life. Hey, Health Junkies. On this episode of the Health Fix podcast, I'm interviewing Forrest Smith. He's the co-founder and CEO of Kinion, a red light therapy device that I've been using a lot lately and digging. Now, here's the thing. We talk about red light therapy, but we take it to another level with Forrest. We're talking about photobiomodulation. That makes it sound super serious, right? Well, here's the thing. The Kinion device has a combination of red light, but it also has lasers in it to make it even stronger. And so this is some of the technology you want to be thinking about when you're looking at red light therapy. And especially this day and age when we have lots of different devices out there and you want to know what's best for you. This particular device is very targeted. It hones in on certain areas and gets to, let's say, the point, if you will, as you hear me talk about a little bit later and how I'm using it on acupuncture points. Now, one of the cool things that Forrest and I dive into on this podcast is we start to talk about how just 15 minutes a day, 4 to 5 days a week, you can reduce inflammation. And one of the specific areas that not too many people are talking about is thyroid inflammation. So many folks have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and even one of the co-founders of Kinion does. And they found that this really helped him to reduce his inflammation. And so in this podcast, we're going to be talking about a little twist on the usual chat about red light and infrared therapy and pain. No, we're going into talking about other things. And even the concept that Kinion has moving forward for helping with gut health. So using targeted laser therapy and red light therapy to help guts. Who doesn't want to have something for their gut that they don't have to take copious amounts of pills and things of that nature? Yes, sign me up. So we're going to talk about why you want to blend laser with red light therapy. We're going to talk about draining your brain of toxins using red light therapy. We're also going to go into really how this can impact and help your vagus nerve. So stay tuned for some cool stuff that we are learning about. And I'm like geeking out over basically in talking with Forrest about what his company has been uncovering and using the latest research on red light therapy and lasers for helping our bodies using photobiomodulation. So let's introduce you to Forrest Smith, co-founder and CEO of Kinion. Hey, Health Junkies. I have Forrest Smith on, and he is the founder and CEO of Kinion, and we are talking about red light therapy today, but we're going to take it with a different twist than what you guys have heard before on the podcast from me. So, Forrest, welcome to the Health Fix podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited about the conversation today.
Oh man, we have got all kinds of stuff to talk about because I geek out on red light. It is my number one thing for recovery. It's I'm kind of addicted to it. I will be honest. And since now trying out your device, I'm like, okay, this one has a whole nother, it's opened up new doors of red light therapy for me. So of course, I always love to start podcasts off by asking like, okay, how are you using red light? You kind of gave me a little hints, but let's tell the folks who are listening, like how you're using it, how you came to get obsessed with it perhaps, and how you got to where you are today.
I love it. I've been a kind of a lifelong athlete, really competitive up through university, and then kind of fell off, as I started kind of going through my career. And one of the things that actually, from an injury standpoint, was a trigger for me for getting into red light was a meniscus tear. And the reason for that is with meniscus tears, you can't really do a great, there's no good outcome from a surgery on this. It's kind of 50-50 whether you're going to go up or down from the outcome from the surgery. I was actually out of competitive sports by the time I tore my meniscus. And so, what happens with that is it used to drive me out of my training patterns by there's certain movements that trigger inflammation and kind of trigger pain in the joint. So overhead squats, for some reason, was just one of those that the movement pattern with it was just not a lot of fun. And so I would trigger that inflammation. My knee would swell up. It'd be blown up for a few weeks, and I couldn't really get that pain and inflammation down very quickly. And I don't really like taking pharmaceuticals for it. So I was just kind of stuck with being out of the gym, out of training for weeks at a time, which really was kind of unfortunate and, had a negative impact on my overall mental health and physical health. And so we have an opportunity with photobiomodulation or light therapy to be able to treat that very effectively. And I couldn't find anything on the market that was, there was a big gap between $30,000 to $50,000 really cool laser therapy devices that would sit on a desktop and had a wand and you could hold on it and see amazing results and had great dosing. Or there were kind of panels that don't dose very well and are kind of a Gen 1, almost prototype level product because you're just strapping a bunch of LEDs on. You don't really have a set kind of dosing pattern for those. And in looking at that, we found that there was an opportunity to be able to develop something that fit the difference there. How do we get something clinical level with lasers included, passing all the regulatory, but sub $500 so people can actually afford to use it at home on a daily basis instead of the $30,000 to $50,000 version. So that's how we started with our first product with Kinion is the Move Plus. And it's been amazing. It's really, what that's changed for me is two main things from a training standpoint is I'm kind of middle-aged now, a tall CrossFitter. My lower back doesn't love me for that. So lower back and then this old meniscus injury where it used to be weeks of time when it would trigger. It's now a day and a half or 2 days because I can get that inflammation back down super fast. And I don't go back into 100%, but I can at least get it back into movement and training and then kind of scale back up on the weights within a couple of days versus weeks. And that's really kind of that's what kicked off my obsession or deep dive, the rabbit holes of photobiomodulation.
Oh man, I know that your story isn't, uncommon, especially for a lot of us folks. I'm also in my late 40s and we're looking at more like mid to late 40s. I'm not gonna say late 40s, I'm aging myself, but we're looking at the devices, and for a lot of people, we're kind of trying to think, okay, well, where I hurt, some of these things just don't make sense. Like a panel, I'm like, that's whole body to me. I don't know how I'm going to pinpoint something, and a lot of people do ask me that. They're like, well, what kind of red light device is going to be best for me? And I'm like, well, what are we working with here? And what are we doing? And of course, today I'd love to kind of dive into that because I love using the Kinion because it is specific to target. I have a slipped disc L5S1. And it's a pain in the butt, literally. And so, things like that for a lot of people are common. But I think a lot of people, they get the idea that red light therapy for pain. Cool. Okay, we get it. But what I want to kind of dive into and kind of the mechanism of why this works, talking about circulation, because we know circulation declines as we get older, talking about nitric oxide, things of that nature, the mitochondria. One of the biggies that's been kind of hot lately is the thyroid, and talking about how we can help use red light therapy to help with the thyroid. So I would love to dive. That was a huge thing there for you, by the way, Forrest.
No, I love it. That's great. Yeah.
Let's geek out a little bit for folks to understand why laser-based red light therapy gets deeper than just skin level stuff, and how, how we're targeting mitochondria, how we're targeting circulation a little bit better.
I love it. It's a great question. We spend tens of thousands of hours on this exact topic, building out mathematical models to show and demonstrate how photons move through tissue. And then we also kind of use our mathematical models, these Monte Carlo models that we build. And then we test versus physiology, because the key to the outcomes from light therapy is biphasic dosing. So the more you dose, you go up the hill from outcomes, and then you jump the shark at some point. So if you kind of overdose, it doesn't go back below zero. It's not going to. These aren't kind of shark-based lasers. They're not going to cut you in half or anything. They're class 1 lasers. They're not going to damage you, but it can reduce the outcomes that you get if the dosing is not right. So there's a sweet spot at the top of that hill from a dosing standpoint. And what really drives that is how many photons are triggering photoacceptors in the body. And so what we've done from a dosing standpoint is look at what depth of tissue, because you have a lot of different kind of layers of tissue, at what depth of tissue and at what order of magnitude, how many of these photoacceptors exist and where are they? And we've worked backwards into how to dose from a photon delivery system. And we actually, on one side of things, we do use an LED for our red light because red light doesn't penetrate through as much. And we're never going to see that going through to the depth of tissue that we're kind of working on from a targeting standpoint. We do use a primary optic to be able to reduce that kind of, typically LEDs, just to kind of give a bit of the background as to the engineering side of this. LEDs are a dye-based technology. They emit light in all directions from that chip until they're packaged into what looks like a cup of an electronic component. That cup kind of pulls that back in from 360 degrees of emission to 120 degrees. That's still extremely broad, and it's also it also just continues to expand. So if you're in front of a panel, as an example, 2 inches forward or 2 inches back changes that dose massively, and you don't know where you are on that hill of the biphasic dosing. And so, what we've done with the laser piece is we use lasers for our infrared, because that combination. Lasers, instead of spreading at 120 degrees, it's around 3 to 4 degrees of spread, and it doesn't continue to spread. It's what they call collimated. So it continues directly and more efficiently into the tissue for dosing internal tissue. And what we're trying to do with our dosing model is dose both the superficial tissue, which is actually done very effectively with different types of beds, and the guys, for example, at Thor Laser make a really cool bed that doses really effectively for the superficial tissue. And your skin is your largest organ, so it's a good way to release a lot of nitric oxide, and there's some really cool benefits for those beds. What we do more is target a combination of the superficial tissue and the internal tissue, so that if you have soft tissue pain and inflammation, lower back issues, shoulder issues, neck issues, osteoarthritis of the knee, particularly when these pathologies are driven primarily by inflammation, the outcomes are so much more powerful because you can target that internal tissue versus having the kind of superficial tissue targeted, and then some of the effects of that bleeding over into that internal tissue, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't realize, because let's put it, there's some creative copy out there, right? And you're reading down and it sounds like it's going to cure everything. And, red light therapy is amazing. It's, all you need is this one device. It's going to do it all. What I found, is like some of these panels, especially the ones that you could put on the body that have a heating kind of component. I'm like, oh, those are nice. And especially if my belly hurts, that feels good, but when I'm wanting something, like you said, to target, then we do need to consider having something that's a little bit more targeted.
Yeah. The laser collimation really helps. And there's also, I think, just how you target this from a theoretical standpoint has really helped us as well. One of the things that we've noticed because it's still a relatively early to market technology from red light therapy, and one of the things that we've seen is that a lot of the targeting or the metrics that people use to measure what they're dosing to your body is essentially the optical power levels coming out of the device, or the optical power levels coming into the tissue. And even within those, there's a big difference. And as an example, with the Move Plus, we have 10 lasers per module, 3 modules, so 30 lasers. Originally, we didn't have that many. We had, kind of based on the medical literature, just 2, but with the same level of power. What we found, though, is, and this is one of the things that took us down the kind of tens of thousands of hours into the mathematical modeling and physiological testing, is that even if we stayed within the best practices from the medical literature, the power levels delivery and having that in 10 emitters instead of 2 made a huge difference for outcomes. And so that kind of triggered the question for us of like, this doesn't really, why? This is the same level of dosing according to how it's measured from the medical literature. And what we had to do is go back in and start really kind of parsing what's the best way to understand how our bodies are accepting these different photons and what's that's triggering from a signaling pathway. And there are a number of different signaling pathways. I think you mentioned nitric oxide. It's a really big one that we trigger, but there's a number of different things that are triggered by photobiomodulation when the dosing is correct. And I think it's not really broadly known that, it's not just a power into your total system as a physiology. It's really targeting correctly with the right wavelengths, with the right frequencies, with the right power levels, et cetera, these different photoacceptors. So start from what you want to trigger and work backwards. It has become a much more effective way for us to work on the dosing modeling versus just, hey, this is one system, let's put this much power into it, if that makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense. I think for the average person, they may be thinking like, okay, so if I need to target it, what kind of device am I looking for? And like, can I change the power within it, or do I need to like bring it back and forth? What do I do? If you can kind of dumb it down a little bit for me even here, and not saying my audience is dumb, it's more me on this one, to be like, okay, so are there different times we put it in for? Are there different, distances? Give me the scoop there.
So we recommend dosing be done at the skin level because otherwise it's extremely hard to be consistent in the dose. So have whatever light therapy device you're using, make sure that it's on your skin and that you have an understanding of how that's going to be delivering this dosage kind of over time. We modulate it through time. We wanted to make it as simple as we could. When we designed our product, again, what we're comparing it with is these really kind of the goal is to make it as low friction as possible so that people can use it at home and not have and stack it with other things that they're doing. If you're having coffee in the morning, being able to wear it makes it much more functional so that you're not having to hold it on yourself or stand in front of a panel or something like this. Making it travel friendly. So if you're on an airplane, you can actually kind of use it as well without the rubber gloves of security coming out to kind of make sure that your batteries aren't going to blow up the plane. We've been through extra FCC clearances for that, but the main thing is reducing the friction for people to be able to use it. In our assumption means that they'll take it on more effectively and hopefully replace something like pharmaceutical solutions that they have for pain and inflammation. But to take one step back, I think you made a really good comment about the kind of claims that we see around photobiomodulation or light therapy. There's so many of these, and we get this quite a lot. We want to be very upfront and set expectations in a way that users are going to be very happy and have a great experience with this. And I think one of the things that we get a question about a lot is, how could it be possible that you could treat so many different pathologies? How is this not snake oil? And I think one of the things that we really focus on with this is, from a mechanistic standpoint, we're treating chronic inflammation. That's one of the main outcomes that you get out of this, is reducing chronic inflammation, depending on where you're treating in the body locally, but it's also, there's some protocols that we can share in a moment about how to do that more systemically as well.
Yeah.
There's some nice high leverage points to the body for being able to treat. And when you reduce chronic inflammation is such a scourge in the body that when you can reduce it anywhere, you can really see some beneficial outcomes for different pathologies in that area. And that's as far kind of as disparate as things like osteoarthritis and endometriosis. And you're like, my knee and kind of female reproductive tissue, how could that possibly not be a snake oil? But the key is, it's not necessarily treating specifically that pathology. It's treating the upstream cause or mechanism, which is that inflammation. So again, it's a deep one to dive into, but it's a very reasonable question for a lot of people to ask, because when you see something that's claiming such broad levels of pathology treatment, there's over 7,000 studies on photobiomodulation now, and they cover a ton of these. Our team contribute to this. There's an international group cataloging and have a full database on drill downs into these that I can share as well. But it's a powerful tool for chronic and damaging inflammation in the body. And I think that's the key takeaway that we try to give to people.
I think that's great because, I mean, think about it this way. Oxidative stress leads to inflammation, leads to breakdown of the body. And as we're aging, like, what's the best anti-aging thing we have? Slow that process down. And one of the things, you know, I was going to put out there just as a note, and I do want to talk about the research that you guys are diving into, so we could put something in the podcast notes, because a lot of folks are really wanting to learn more, but also want that background now to make sure we're not talking snake oil. One of the cool things I have thought about the Kinion device is that because it is so targeted, you know, we were talking thyroid for a minute, we also have acupuncture points that can be targeted as well. And so as an acupuncturist, I geek out a little bit on it, and I'll be like, oh, I'm going to put this in certain places based on what I know to be connected for the inflammation in the body. Have you heard anybody else doing that? Is anyone else playing around like me?
Yes, there's a couple of really cool labs out of China where kind of acupuncture is more broadly adopted that have done great research on this. We're actually seeing this relative to things like treatment, and I've forgotten specific points. That there's acupuncture points, kind of like there's EEG points, like where you have like a letter and a number specific to those, and they're using different acupuncture points that are not local to, for example, vagus nerve, but from which we're seeing really powerful autonomic nervous system impacts. And there's a number of different things, but that's one that comes to mind just because we saw this last week. I think it was a relatively recent, in the last year, study on this, and measured through, I believe, heart rate variability and some EEG data that they were pulling from autonomic nervous state, really helping people get out of fight or flight kind of sympathetic nervous system responses and into kind of that rest and digest phase, and it's powerful. I think there's a lot. Everything's connected, and we see a couple of different things. One is this idea of acupuncture and acupuncture points triggering high leverage outcomes. One other one that I think is a really interesting one that you would like to geek out on probably as well is the lymphatic and glymphatic system. So one of the things that we see with a lot, particularly with kind of our aging users, is if you're not sleeping enough, if your recovery is not great, you start generating and aggregating more waste material in your brain. And how can we get that waste material out of the brain? Because it increases the risks for different types of dementia, for Alzheimer's, but also you just don't feel cognitively as aware or kind of alert. And what we found is this system of glial cells and the glymphatic system, is kind of what they've dubbed it, is the glial cells clearing out the brain from these different waste materials, and then the lymphatic system kind of behind the cheekbones and then in the necks are kind of bottleneck points for that. And so being able to treat the brain and then this lymphatic drainage system for that waste material has a powerful impact in clearing a lot of that waste material out of the brain.
That's so cool. That's so cool. And like, a lot of the points, as I think about it, are like close to the parasympathetic calming points too. So you get 2 for 1s.
Yes.
And one of the things we do in our house all the time is we're walking around. My husband in particular is walking around all the time with the device actually more behind the ears a little bit, because there's a point Chinese like called Anmian. That's a calming point where the vagus nerve comes out. And so we're like, everybody's got their new necklace on here, but I'm thinking of patients to have that as true, because then they can help to really get things drained out. Now, let's talk a little bit about how red light therapy, I can never say photobiomodulation. It's such
It's a mouthful.
But how that helps things like glands, like thyroid, like moving the lymph nodes out of here. What are we getting after? Because I think for folks to like, okay, that's cool. What is exactly happening? Is it nitric oxide? Is it heme? Is it what are we going after?
So the what we're seeing right now from those, I think splitting those off into 2 different versions. One is with the hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's. There's been more and more research over the last 3 to 4 years really demonstrating increased functionality out of the thyroid. And there's this. I'm blanking on the KPI, the kind of the metrics, the kind of biofeedback that they've measured for these, but it was a very substantial improvement from a thyroid function. I think I mentioned before we started kind of chatting here, one of the reasons we started on this this research path is my business partner has Hashimoto's, which is essentially kind of super hypothyroidism, and it's been tough for him because it affects energy levels, and as part of that research, going down the rabbit hole of how is photobiomodulation moving the needle for this. We've found that it actually is a really broadly experienced pathology for women, particularly around perimenopause and menopause. And this was, our research team skews male, and it's just not something that was on our radar because of that. And it's been really interesting to see these kind of double-digit increases in key biometrics around thyroid function. It also stacks very well with a couple of different supplements. And so the two that have come up in multiple studies are vitamin D3 and selenium. And those actually work on separate pathways from the photobiomodulation. But I'll have to get you the actual research papers over, and happy to kind of tag those through and provide a little bit more summary on those, because I don't have the biometrics that were in the papers in mind, but I do know it was kind of double-digit increases in thyroid function measured, typically with blood markers, I believe. But on the other side, with the lymphatic system, essentially what we found through the research around this is that you're seeing a number of different things improving out of this. One is the clearance rates for different waste materials from the brain, and that's really measured. Those are typically blood draws. And what's been assumed around this, although we in some cases what we have is like the ABC, so kind of the dosing and how it's being used and how it's triggering the XYZ of outcomes. We don't have in some cases the mechanistic underpinning for this completely delineated yet, but the increase in clearance of different kind of waste proteins in the brain has been measured relatively effectively in large scale studies. And again, part of what this has been assumed to be is the increased level of mitochondrial function. And so there's a photoacceptor in the electron transport chain, the fourth phase of that electron transport chain called cytochrome C oxidase, where essentially, particularly the infrared light triggers a dissociation of nitric oxide from that binding site. And this isn't something that doesn't happen naturally. What it does is it just increases the pace of that kind of dissociation. And when you increase that pace, it's a bottleneck. And so when you remove the bottleneck, what happens is when the dosing is correct, is that you essentially double your cellular energy generation in the form of ATP. So you double the production capacity for this. And there's a couple of things that happen kind of in that kind of nuclear retrograde signaling from the mitochondria, which is, and you alluded to it earlier, is the oxidative stress. You start seeing a very short-term, and we had a good analogy for this. I was out in Texas recently, and we got a good football analogy for it, which is essentially you spike these reactive oxygen species very short-term, and then they drop and carry on for 24 to 48 hours in that lower state. And our football analogy for that was you're essentially getting your mitochondria as a football team to run more plays. Like it's at the end of the game, you got your 2-minute drill, you're running more plays. That means you're going to get more yards, but it also means you're going to have more dropped passes. And so that's the reactive oxygen species. It kind of spikes short term, but you're going to see more touchdowns, which is kind of see more of that energy generation and the reduced oxidative stress downstream in that intracellular signaling.
Oh man, all of us could use a little bit of that, one more plays in the game. But also, I mean, energy as a whole, when we think of energy, a lot of people are going to think just like energy in the body, but we don't realize that energy is made every single cell and every single place in the body. So if we do have an injury, or we do have a spot that's just like a hot spot, let's call it that, where we tend to have pain, having something like this on board can be really nice to be able to like, okay, pop it on, afterwards. Then you're not limping for the next, 2 days, or limping 2 days later when things all catch up with you, that kind of thing. So important.
Yeah, it's great. One of the things that we kind of coach with this is again, habit stacking. And when you're consistent with it, the quality of tissue, two big things. One is re-injuring the same tissue is very common. And particularly with a lot of the performance athletes, we work with professional CrossFitters, the Olympic U.S. weightlifting team, NBA, NFL, special forces guys, and they're really pushing their bodies to the kind of the margins of what a human can do. But what we find out of that is they often re-injure the same tissue, and when you see what they look like, we've kind of taken a deep dive on this with a lot of them and said, let's put you on an infrared camera and see what's the difference between the tissue temperature for your healthy tissue and this area that you keep re-injuring. And one of the things that's come up is when you have an old injury and it does keep re-injuring, very, very often that you have a cold pool of tissue around that injury, and your cardiovascular delivery of oxygen and of nutrients that actually help that tissue heal is impaired. And that's based on this chronic inflammation issue. And again, that's something that we treat very effectively. And we've seen kind of, world-class athletes 10 years after an injury still having these cold pools, but you start treating, and 4 or 5 weeks in from treating with photobiomodulation, all leveled out and reduced the tendency and risks of ongoing injuries of that same tissue.
That's really cool to hear that. I know a lot of people who listen to my podcast get the thermography of total body, or even just like upper body for the breast tissue, so that you can see where cold pooling is happening. Even on the jaws, you'll see a lot of it for chronic TMJ, and you'll see a lot of redness in the neck, but you'll also see like elbows or wrists or hands even being cold pooled too, just depending on what's going on. So that is even relevant to those of you who are listening who are not athletes. This can be old in like carpal tunnel stuff.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And even things like, peripheral neuropathy, you start seeing that demyelination of nerve tissue. And it's really, a lot of that is metabolically based. And we're seeing it so much more because of the increase in prediabetes and diabetes, because of the lack of movement and standard American diet, a number of different factors. But when you can see that drop in tissue, kind of temperature relative to, and as a reflector or as a proxy for metabolic function and blood delivery, and really what you'd like to see happening in the tissue from a health and wellness standpoint, it's just really powerful to see people who have a hard time to go at the other end of the spectrum of the performance guys, of the professional athletes. People have a hard time going to go walk a mile, being able to start getting out and doing 5 miles, because they've been able to get that metabolic blocker kind of bottleneck out of the system, and really kind of start working through that from a scaling standpoint.
So I have a question about, we're going from say a mile of walk to 5 with the use of dosage here. Obviously the biggest thing that I always have to remind people is you have to use it to get benefit. It's not a one and done kind of thing. You have to be consistent, but like consistency wise, like time, what on average, how much time and how many days a week for people to really see progress?
So we advise 15 minutes a day. And if you can every day, but a minimum of 4 to 5 days a week, and you're going to see really powerful changes. The short-term changes are the inflammation drops very quickly. The long-term changes are, particularly if it's something where you're seeing traumatic tissue damage, you're recovering from an injury or a surgery, the recovery of the soft tissue and even bones is really accelerated. And what you grow back from there's great histology slides. So histology slides are essentially kind of cellular level like pictures of what's happening in the cells. And the histology slides showing the quality of the scar tissue that develops is night and day. It's so much closer to your original tissue, so much more plastic, so much more mobile, so much stronger, so much more robust scar tissue that it's just night and day. And it's one of those things where even with things like C-sections, we've seen you can really see almost an invisible line there, because people have started using this from a dosing standpoint for being able to minimize the scar tissue size and kind of optimize the type of scar tissue and the strength and plasticity of the scar tissue.
Wow. That's incredible, because so many women do struggle with those darn scars, and they can be numb. And then I feel like it hits pelvic floor, and there's all kinds of other things too. Now let's talk about the belly for a second, because you had briefly mentioned endometriosis. We talked before we hit record about IBS, and I think a lot of people are thinking, like, how is it even going to get to my intestines? How would it get to a uterus? How can, how does it have an effect there? Give us a little background on what you've seen there, and probably some of the lymphatic movement too is part of it as well with the light.
Absolutely. It really comes back down with IBS. Actually, one of our business partners has IBS, and which kind of flares into Crohn's occasionally. And it's, he would have these episodes where he would lose like 40 or 50 pounds because he just, and ended up in the hospital. And then, if you're on a training cycle, you lose anything that you've gained, and it's very demoralizing from a just kind of a mental health aspect as well. But it comes back to the same type of things that we're treating in general, which is reduced inflammation. So in the gut, when you can reduce inflammation, you can actually start. You have those tight junctions that you can actually start kind of, if you're having a standard American diet, if there's microplastics in what you're eating and drinking, there's a number of different causes for why we're seeing leaky gut with more and more of our users. But when you can reduce the inflammation, you actually, what's happening in the gut there is when you have that leaky gut, you're actually always just consistently putting more inflammation out into the systemically. So you start having more immune issues, kind of autoimmune issues downstream from this. When you can start kind of butting up those tight junctions in your gut more effectively by reducing the inflammation, people start seeing really powerful impacts from, IBS is one. The other trigger for IBS that we see is this FB ratio, which essentially kind of there's a band. Too much on either end of the spectrum is not great, but there's a band of different types of gut microbes, and when you can measure them, typically, sorry for the funny way of phrasing it, but with poop studies, and when you're outside of the healthy band, and you can actually, there's kind of tighter and tighter bands around healthier and healthier outcomes, but those are a big impact for that IBS piece as well. But I think the big one is reducing inflammation, helping to kind of shore up the leaky gut, and then the kind of secondary impacts for that are shifting that FB ratio in a way that helps you, with that balance, create more short chain fatty acids in the gut, which does a number of things downstream, and it's probably a bit of a rabbit hole to dive into. But how your gut senses satiety and the different nutrients that it needs is really linked in with that as well. There's some great kind of literature on this. We've seen more and more. It's been nice to have things like Ozempic, but it'd be nice to be able to treat patients with a more natural methodology that increases GLP-1 naturally. And one of the things that you see with that is kind of that short chain fatty acid, kind of the balance of your gut promoting more short chain fatty acids as a kind of production output of these bacteria, and then the downstream impacts of that relative to your gut satiety and how your gut recruits or triggers you to recruit additional nutrients. And it really is kind of a ball of wax to a can of worms to unwind there, but it's a really powerful tool for being able to support better diet, tight gut junctions, and less inflammation in the body overall.
That makes sense. It makes sense. I definitely use Relay for my gut when it gets a little funky, and I know it helps for sure. Now I'm thinking, that plus liver for a lot of folks too. The fatty liver thing's a big deal as well. So, obviously I'm talking different protocols and whatnot. And as a doc, I probably could think of all kinds of fun things to do and show people with the acupuncture points. But let's actually show people the device so that they can see what it looks like, how it goes on the body, and kind of give the breakdown in terms of why you designed it the way you did. So for utility and whatnot, so folks can see that.
Absolutely. So I'm gonna show you as a demonstration of this.
Okay.
My kind of normal protocol. We work with a lab out of Japan that's developed a protocol called the proximal priority therapy, and the logic behind this was essentially treating. We interact with hemoglobin very effectively, and we mentioned earlier kind of dissociating nitric oxide, dumping a bunch of nitric oxide in your blood, really healthy for you systemically. It's one of those things where there's a bit of a dive to have back into this, but there's a very big paradigm shift from kind of thinking of the body as a two gas system of oxygen and carbon dioxide. And I might be dating myself a little bit here, but like that's what we learned coming through school, to a three gas system that now includes nitric oxide. And there's a lot to dive into and parse on that. But the long story short is being able to dump a lot of this into your blood improves the plasticity of your blood vessels. So your cardiovascular endothelial tissue is the medical way of referring to that. And the plasticity there really is a powerful lever and a powerful early diagnostic tool for cardiovascular disease and for general cardiopulmonary health. But one way we found that's really powerful for doing this is taking the 3 modules and then putting 1 on the back of the neck and then 2 over essentially the largest blood vessels in your body. And I started this protocol as part of a trial we were doing with the Japanese lab. And what I found was I'm doing this for 15 minutes every morning with my emails, my coffee. And then I'm doing my lower gut about 1.5 inches below my navel for treating gut as well. And this is these are kind of part of that proximal priority therapy. One of the things that we found out of this is that affect, or essentially your mood and how you feel, was really powerfully moved by this. And I did this for about 10 days or 12 days and didn't see much, like keeping a journal on it, didn't see much movement. After 2 weeks, you notice it, like you feel better, like, and you just approach every day with a little bit better optimism and mood. And again, the research calls this affect. It's a very subjective thing to measure, but the outcomes were so drastic with that it was something I wanted to try and that I've kept on since then. And the one other thing that I noticed with this, just as an aside, and this is very, again, kind of anecdotal, but it is in line with what we're seeing from the medical research as well, is immune health. I've got 2 boys, 5 and 9, and they always drag in colds and stuff from school. I've been doing this protocol for a year and I just don't get sick. And so it's just like the immune response that your gut and again, kind of this cardiovascular impact have is, and again, it's N of 1, it's very anecdotal, but there are research studies showing kind of outcomes for this. One of the problems for this, though, from a research standpoint, is that it's so multivariate, your gut and the impact of gut on immune health, that it's really hard to find that. Like, we've got the ABC, and we got the ABC of what we're doing, and we have this XYZ of what it's triggering, and we know the changes that are kind of happening between those, but like what's actually mediating that is still not 100% agree. There's different kind of schools of thought on that, and you get 2 researchers in a building, and they've got 3 arguments happening about 6 different subjects.
I could see that. So interesting that the protocol, because I'm called to do it this way because of the thyroid. I've been dragged around that way versus the protocol being this way. And I'm now going I don't know which way my husband wears it. He probably does it the way you did because he probably looked at videos or something. But me, I always have it backwards. So that's funny. Maybe I better turn it around for a little bit.
Yeah.
Oh,
But it's nice though. Again, with women, female hypothyroidism and the impacts of that. Again, we just kind of looked into this over the last couple of years, but it's so widespread. It's really kind of like, I feel like 60 or 70% of women in perimenopause or menopause have this hypothyroid impact, and that's a huge number of people for it to not really have a more broadly kind of available best practice or approach. And I think doing it as you're doing it is a really awesome way of doing that.
Oh, we'll see what happens. Still N of one over here,
Yeah.
and just suggesting to other folks, but I only know what's going on with myself. But it's interesting you said 2 weeks, because I think a lot of people this day and age were used to like the magic pill, situation. And so giving it a little time and having a little patience is absolutely key.
Yes, patience and consistency. That's, again, one thing that I do, and I'd love to include this as well, is we also talk to folks who are like, so we say habit stack it. Find something that you do every day and then stack it with that. And very often people will come back with like, oh, like my meditation. And, if I ask, how many times you've meditated in the last 2 weeks, and it's one time, that's an aspirational habit. That's not a habit. It doesn't have to be the healthiest habit you stack it with, but like if it's Netflix and Cheetos that you're doing every day, do it with that.
I love it. Yeah. Whatever will get you to do it. And drinking coffee, most people are on that jam, or checking email, as we said, maybe if that helps with mood and email, for what it's worth. So let's round out this podcast with some like fun stories of really cool transformations you've seen with folks, just really some of the coolest stuff you've seen. I'd love to hear a couple stories.
Absolutely. So there's two ends of the spectrums that are very exciting about that. And the one end is we're seeing professional athletes who have very often it's repetitive stress injuries. So guys who are like, okay, I'm an ultra marathoner, but my feet are like, I'm going to have to stop doing my job because I can't, like plantar fasciitis, like this soft tissue impacts of that are just so heavy. Those guys over a month period getting back in and kind of on the road and with no pain is a huge win. We see very similar with kind of CrossFitters and Olympic lifters, their knees and their hips. They do so much kind of the same type of Olympic lift movements that their hips and their knees just get worn out with it. And so things like patellar tendonitis, being able to treat those and get those they can't believe it. They're like, okay, I'll try anything. Like, let's just see, judge the tree by the fruit type thing. And seeing those guys get super excited about how being able to go back into their career, like what they do for a living as with kind of renewed vigor, because they're empowered to actually treat the pain points that were stopping them. That's the one in the spectrum. But for me, my favorites for this are what we see on the other end of the spectrum, where our aging users haven't been able to sleep through the night for 10 years, and now they can sleep through the night. My wife couldn't walk up the stairs. She's walking up the stairs. We're going on daily walks. She's been having to use these little like scooter things in the grocery store. She's walking everywhere now. That's what really gets me excited. I think those are the ones that we're a mission-driven team, and our mission is to increase the quality of life for the largest number of people we can in the most measurable way we can. And those are the home runs that I take away from it.
I think a lot of people can relate to those. Absolutely. I mean, especially the sleep. It's because it's not something folks will tend to think about as the lymphatics and whatnot to help the brain drain to sleep. So super, super cool on that end. So what's next for you guys? I saw a little blip on the website about something maybe called Heal Plus and
yes. We have a new product this product, the current Move Plus, actually has 808 nanometer infrared and 660 nanometer deep red, and is really particularly dosed around soft tissue, chronic pain, inflammation. One of the things that's happened over the past 4 years that we've been developing and selling the Move Plus is more research into additional wavelengths and more research into kind of other areas of the body. And so the Heal Plus will be treating gut specifically with 4 different wavelengths of infrared for the gut, because those actually penetrate through better. And you can dose with the Move Plus, but this is going to be really dialed in specifically for gut tissue. And it's going to have huge impacts. We're already seeing some amazing impacts, and it's interesting because the on one side it's the GIs that we work with from a kind of interactive standpoint, but the ones who have been most kind of positive or upbeat about this have been immunologists, because we get it into their hands and they just see those outcomes, and they're just excited to have it, a non-pharmaceutical tool in the toolkit. So that's been really powerful. And then one more that I think will be exciting for you is later this year, which would be probably more towards September, I believe. So the Heal Plus will be out in May for delivery. And then in September, we're going to be delivering what we're calling the Calm Plus, which is a transcutaneous vagus nerve stimulation device, which is just awesome. That's one where the short-term impacts are much more noticeable, but it's triggering faster responses from the nervous system, from that neurological tissue. And the reason we actually started in with that one was because we were developing our gut product, and we noticed in that development that every time we run a test, roughly 15% of the users wouldn't get a great outcome from the different blood draws for brain and different things that we're testing for from a kind of the brain impacts. And because your gut is so tightly tied to your brain, it's kind of your second brain is what we're seeing from a research standpoint. But those 15%, as we dove into it, essentially those guys were in fight or flight, just kind of high adrenal stress mode all the time. And your vagus nerve is your highway of communication between the gut and the brain. And so if that highway of communication has too much traffic, those signals just aren't getting through, and you're not going to see the best outcomes for the gut treatments as well. So what we found was a great way to fix that was help people modulate their kind of autonomic state. So, get them out of fight or flight and get them back into rest and digest. And when you do that, we're now up to like 99% of the people seeing the outcomes that we were anticipating from the gut treatments.
Oh, cool. Cool. Well, I know a lot of folks are going to be very excited to see your research and where to find it. So we'll definitely get that from you so that I can put it in our podcast notes at drjkrausend.com, because boy, that's good stuff. I am really excited to hear about that, because guts are tough. Guts are really tough to treat. And trying to explain to folks about the nervous system is, and even sometimes they can be doing all the things and nothings.
Yes.
Too. And that's not fair. It's just not fair.
Yeah. And sometimes you just need a little bit of that 20% boost to kind of get you out of the hole. And we've found the same thing with treating joints is like, oh, if I just had a 20% reduction in my inflammation and pain, I'll be back out walking and moving and training and doing. And oftentimes it's just kind of let me get out of the hole so that I can actually see the benefits of what I'm committing to from a diet and exercise standpoint. And it's just an exciting thing to be able to kind of contribute to that for people's experience and journeys to health.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to seeing that. I look forward to looking at the Heal Plus as well and checking out what else you guys got going on over the next couple of years. So Forrest, thank you so much for coming on. I sincerely appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. What a great discussion.
Yeah. Look forward to more. Thanks for
Likewise.
Hey, fellow health junkie. Thanks for listening to the Health Fix podcast. If you enjoyed tuning in, please help support me to get the word out about the podcast. Subscribe, rate, and review, and just get that word out. Thanks again for listening.